picture, if you will, a jagged, just seemingly impregnable fortress sitting high up in the Alborz Mountains.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you're looking at a map of modern-day Iran, you really want to focus on that rugged terrain right south of the Caspian Sea.
Right.
You are looking at an elevation of like 2,163 meters. Up there, the air is noticeably thin, the winters are absolutely brutal, and the terrain is it's utterly unforgiving.
It's essentially just a sheer wall of rock.
Exactly. And for centuries, just whispering the name of this place struck absolute fear into the hearts of powerful sultans, mighty emperors, really anyone who dared to claim absolute rule over the Middle East. The locals, looking up at this impossible structure, called it the Eagle's Nest.
Which is a great name.
It really is. But today, we know it as Alamut.
Yeah, and it really is one of those rare places where the physical geography perfectly matches its terrifying historical reputation. Right. Because when you stand at the base and you look at those sheer vertical drops, I mean, some of them are hundreds of meters of uninterrupted stone, you immediately understand why this specific mountain became the epicenter of one of the most famous and, frankly, most misunderstood resistance movements in human history.
It just looks like a place built by the earth itself, specifically to keep people out.
Oh, absolutely.
And getting past those myths, to figure out what actually happened behind those stone walls, is our mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are going to explore the true history and the incredibly intricate politics of a man named Hassan Sabbah.
Yes.
We'll look at the fiercely independent Ismaili state that he built, their massive asymmetrical opposition to the overwhelming military might of the Seljuk Empire, and then the eventual highly dramatic fall of Alamut.
Right. It's a narrative that has been buried under literal dirt and, well, more importantly, figurative political propaganda for nearly a millennium.
Yeah, 1,000 years of spin. And to dig into this, we aren't just relying on old folklore. We have a really fascinating stack of sources in front of us today.
We do.
We are looking at historical records spanning several centuries, recent investigative works like The Unfinished Event by Fatma Ali Asghar, and a wealth of new archaeological data. But I mean, the crown jewel of our sources today is the finding from an unbelievable 25-year, 16-season archaeological excavation of the Alamut site.
Led by Dr. Hamida Chubak.
Yes, you really have to just pause and appreciate the sheer dedication it takes to spend a quarter of a century moving Earth on a freezing mountain peak just to find the truth.
Seriously, it's incredible. And what Dr. Chubak and her team uncovered up there completely upends the traditional story we've all been told.
It really does. Now, if you're listening to this and you're getting ready to dive headfirst into 11th century Middle Eastern politics, you should know right up front the history of this era is written by bitter rivals.
Oh, constantly.
You have Sunni empires, Shiite rebels, and centuries of overlapping, highly biased propaganda. So our job today isn't to take a side in a medieval holy war or tell you who was righteous and who was wicked.
Right, absolutely not.
We are just sifting through the surviving records and this new archaeological data to figure out how these ancient chess games were actually played. We want to understand the mechanics of the history.
That is such a crucial distinction because, if we want to understand the rebels of Alamut, the people who willingly isolated themselves on a freezing rock, we first have to understand the massive oppressive empire they were rebelling against.
Right.
You don't build a fortress in the sky unless there is something genuinely terrifying down on the ground.
Okay, let's unpack this, which means we need to set the grand board of the 11th century. Let's talk about the Seljuk Empire.
Let's do it.
According to the historical records, a massive geopolitical earthquake happened in the year 447 of the Islamic calendar, the Hijri year.
Which corresponds to roughly 45 AD.
Right. The Seljuks marched into Baghdad. Now, to understand why this matters, we have to talk about who was running Baghdad before the Seljuks got there.
Right, because up until 447 AH, Baghdad and the Abbasid Caliphate, which, by the way, was the traditional Sunni spiritual center of the Islamic world, they were actually under the thumb of the Buyids.
Okay. The Buyids?
Yeah, the Buyids were a dynasty from the mountainous regions of Iran, and crucially, they were Shiite.
So you have a situation where the Sunni Caliph, who is the theoretical leader of the entire Islamic world, is essentially a political hostage to a Shiite military dynasty.
Basically, yes.
I mean, the Caliph has the religious title, but the Buyids have all the actual power in the city.
Exactly. The Caliph was a figurehead, He couldn't make military or political moves without the Buyid's approval. It was a deeply humiliating situation for the Abbasids.
I can imagine.
But then enter the Seljuks. The Seljuks were a formidable, migrating Turkic people from the Central Asian steppes. They were a massive military force, and importantly, they were staunchly Sunni.
Okay.
So when they marched into Baghdad in 447 AH, they routed the Buyids, effectively ending their rule in the city, and brought the Abbasid Caliph out of his political isolation.
Wow. And what forms out of this specific event is a highly calculated, incredibly potent, two-way strategic alliance.
Yes, it is.
It reminds me a bit of like the historical alliance between the Pope and Charlemagne, or even modern political structures, where a powerful super-po aligns with a widely beloved traditional candidate.
That's a great analogy.
One side has the physical capital, the other side has the moral capital. Let's break down exactly what this exchange looked like. The Seljuks brought the swords, the horses, and the raw military might to protect the institution of the caliphate. But what did the caliph give the Seljuks in return?
Well, he gave them the most valuable currency in medieval politics, which is absolute legitimacy. You see, you can conquer a massive territory with military force. The Mongols did it, countless nomadic empires did it. But holding that territory and ruling it without facing constant localized rebellion, that requires the populace to believe you have a divine or legal right to rule them.
Right, they have to buy in.
Exactly. And the Abbasid Caliph gave the Seljuks exactly that. In exchange for their protection, the Caliph officially granted the Seljuk leader, Tukrul Beg, the title Sultan of East and West.
Sultan of East and West. I mean, they're not leaving much room for ambiguity there, are they?
Not at all. It was the highest possible endorsement. This official recognition from the ultimate religious authority in the Islamic world was it was transformative.
Yeah.
Overnight, the Seljuks went from being viewed by the urban populations as a migrating, potentially dangerous nomadic force into the legal, divine, and rightful rulers of the Islamic lands. They were legitimized by God's representative on earth.
So they became what the historical sources officially call the defenders of Sunnism.
Exactly.
And they structured their newly legitimized empire in a very specific, decentralized way, well, at least geographically. They centered their political, administrative, and economic power in the city of Isfahan, right on the Iranian plateau.
Yep.
But their spiritual and religious power remained anchored securely in Baghdad with the caliph.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this dual-axis alliance is a stroke of political genius. By merging absolute, unquestioned military might in Isfahan with the highest possible religious authority in Baghdad, the Seljuks created a system where they could frame any political rival, any local rebellion, as an enemy of God.
Okay, if I'm understanding this correctly, this extreme centralization of power completely isolates any minority factions.
Completely.
If you are a group that doesn't perfectly align with the Isfahan-Baghdad axis, you don't just have a political disagreement over land or taxes.
No.
You are instantly labeled a rogue autonomous opposition. You are branded a heretic and a traitor simultaneously.
That is the exact mechanism of their power. The theological and political realms were totally fused. If you speak out against the tax policies being dictated by the administrators in Isfahan, you are, by definition, defying the divine will of the caliph in Baghdad. It's an impenetrable closed loop of authority. And the Seljuks established advanced, highly structured administrative systems across the Iranian plateau to enforce this. They had a massive, suffocating central government.
So if you're a dissenting group, like the Nizari Ismailis, who were a specific branch of Shia Islam, you find yourself trapped inside this massive empire that tolerates absolutely zero opposition.
Zero.
Which brings us back to the mountains. If a central government has an absolute monopoly on military force and divine right, and they control the cities, the roads, the trade routes, and the economy, how on earth does an opposition movement survive? I mean, you can't just blend into a bustling city like Isfahan and hold secret meetings.
No, you'd be crushed immediately by the state apparatus. If you want to survive, you have to go where their armies, their armored cavalry, and their tax collectors physically cannot reach you.
Right.
You have to remove yourself from the board entirely. You build a stronghold in the clouds.
Enter Hassan Sabbah. We are now in the autumn of 483 AH, or 1090 AD. Hassan Sabbah, the leader of the Nizari Ismailis, sets his sights on a fortress high in the Alborz Mountains, originally built by a local ruler named Valsudan.
Right.
This is Alamut. But based on the archaeological data from Dr. Chubak's 25-year dig, The Alamut that Hassan Sabbah took over and expanded was absolutely not the place we typically imagine from the movies or old legends.
Not at all. When we hear the word fortress or castle, we usually conjure up an image of a single, spooky, isolated stone tower sitting on a hill.
Right, like a solitary building where people just hide behind a wooden door.
Exactly. But the excavation reveals something entirely different and strategically much more terrifying for the Seljuk Empire. Alamut was not a single building. It was a highly intelligent, unified, defensive landscape.
The word landscape is key here, because the scale of this defensive grid, as outlined in the sources, covered 2,000 square kilometers.
I really want the listener to grasp the size of that. 2,000 square kilometers. That is roughly the size of the modern country of Mauritius or the island of Maui in Hawaii.
All right, I have to stop you there because that completely breaks my mental model of this
Oh,
system.
wow, right?
We always picture a single, isolated tower, but a 2,000 square kilometer defensive grid, that's not a fortress. That's practically a small country, an independent nation state woven directly into the topography of the mountains.
Yes.
How do you even govern a fortress that large?
Well, you decentralize the defense. It forces us to completely rethink the military and logistical capabilities of the Ismailis. This wasn't a ragged group of people hiding in a single cave.
Truly not.
The landscape consisted of a massive, interconnected network of over 50 structures, but specifically 7 main castles. You had Alamut, acting as the central nervous system, but also major, heavily fortified strongholds like Lambazar, Nevisarsha, and Shirkuh.
And these castles weren't just randomly placed wherever there was a flat rock. The sources say they were positioned with absolute geographic precision.
Yes. They were meticulously surveyed and built so that they maintained direct visual lines of sight with one another across the valleys and peaks.
Wow.
This is where the tactical brilliance of Hassan Sabbah really comes into focus. By establishing this base in such incredibly rugged, inaccessible terrain, the Ismailis effectively created a state within a state right in the absolute heart of the Seljuk Empire.
The Seljuks controlled the flat plains, but the Ismailis owned the sky.
Perfectly said.
And the way they communicated across this massive area is straight out of a modern military intelligence textbook. The historical records detail how they transmitted messages rapidly across these castles using optical communication.
Yes, optical communication.
During the day, they used light signals, likely reflecting sunlight off polished metal mirrors, or they used specific smoke signals. At night, they would use fire beacons.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that for a second. The use of optical communication across a 2,000 square kilometer grid represents an incredibly sophisticated military intelligence network for the 11th century.
It really does.
It requires a standardized code. A random flash of light means nothing. They had to have a predetermined binary system. Perhaps 2 flashes means enemy vanguard spotted, 3 flashes means send provisions.
Right, but if it's cloudy in one valley, what do they do? Do they have secondary relay stations?
Exactly. They had countless smaller watchtowers acting as relay points to ensure the signal never broke, regardless of weather in one specific valley.
Oh, wow.
They could monitor the mountain passes and relay enemy troop movements almost instantly. If a Seljuk army started marching up a valley 50 miles away, the defenders at the Central Alamut Command would know about it before the Seljuk vanguard even realized they were being watched.
Right.
They had total, unblinking situational awareness.
It's like having an 11th century fiber optic network. The speed of light is a lot faster than a horse galloping up a mountain. It is brilliantly paranoid and highly effective. But here's the thing. Walls, smoke signals, and castles can only keep an invading army out. They don't give people a reason to fight. They don't inspire generational loyalty.
Right.
So if I'm trying to figure this out,
Right.
what was the actual ideological fight about? Why were Hassan Sabbah and thousands of his followers rebelling in the first place? Why go to the immense trouble of building an optical grid and living on a freezing mountain?
That is the core of the conflict, and it's where the traditional narrative often falls short. Hassan Sabbah didn't just capture Alamut and sit there twiddling his thumbs.
Yeah.
He lived inside that fortress for 35 years, continuously orchestrating a highly disciplined resistance. And while there were absolutely deep theological differences between the Shiite Ismailis and the Sunni Seljuks, at the heart of this widespread, popular resistance was a fundamental rejection of the Seljuk economic structure,
Okay.
specifically something called the Ukka system.
Okay, let's look at this ITA system. From the way our sources describe it, This sounds less like a religious doctrine and more like a medieval form of extreme wealth extraction.
Yes. The Ita was essentially a feudal administrative system. The Seljuk central government was massive, and maintaining their vast armies required immense resources. So the state would assign ikadas, which were grants of land or the tax revenues from that land, to military officers, governors, or state officials.
So instead of the central government paying a general a salary in gold, they just point to a farming province and say, that region is your salary now. Go collect your money from the peasants.
Precisely. And in practice, this often resulted in the brutal confiscation of the common people's wealth, their crops, and their ancestral lands. The central authority and their military commanders were squeezing the local populations dry to fund their vast empire.
Wow.
It was an incredibly oppressive, highly centralized system of taxation.
And the architect of this system, the mastermind running the Seljuk administration, was Hassan Sabbah's primary rival. This wasn't just a faceless bureaucracy. The man pulling the levers was the powerful Seljuk vizier, Qaji Nizam al-Tusi.
Nizam al-Mulk is a towering figure in medieval history. He wasn't just a bean counter. He was an intellectual heavyweight and a ruthless state builder.
Right.
He designed the Iqta system to centralize wealth in Isfahan. And to ensure ideological compliance, he also founded the Nizamiya schools, which were essentially state-sponsored universities designed to standardize and propagate the official state religion, Sunnism, and to train the bureaucrats who would run his extractive empire.
So you have these two absolute masterminds squaring off. Hassan Sabbah up in his mountain network, building an autonomous, decentralized state, and Nizam al-Mulk down in the capital pulling the levers of a massive centralized empire.
Exact.
And the hatred between them was intensely personal and very well documented. Nizam al-Mulk actually wrote a famous political treatise called the Siyasat-Nameh, or the Book of Government.
And in that book, Nizam al-Mulk makes his feelings about the Ismailis crystal clear. He doesn't just disagree with them, he labels them the ultimate enemies of religion and state.
Why that specific phrasing? Enemies of religion and state.
Because of that dual-axis alliance we talked about earlier, the Ismailis were Shiite, which challenged the state-sponsored Sunni orthodoxy coming out of Baghdad, and their fierce autonomy at Alamut, their refusal to pay taxes, directly challenged the political and economic central power of the Seljuks in Isfahan. They were a threat to both pillars of the Seljuk Empire simultaneously.
So what does this all mean? If you think about it, we constantly hear this story framed purely as a religious holy war. But digging into the mechanics of the Iqta system shows it was just as much, if not more, a violent class struggle. Sabbah was essentially fighting a medieval form of oppressive taxation. The central government's extreme economic extraction deeply alienated the local farming populations. This makes Hassan Sabbah's movement, which promised economic justice and autonomy from the state, incredibly appealing to the common people, regardless of their strict theological background.
What's fascinating here is that this completely reshapes how we view the conflict. This wasn't just a military war of sieges and arrows. It was a high-stakes intellectual and economic chess match between two distinct visions of society.
Right.
Nizam al-Mulk represented extreme centralization, state-sponsored religion, and heavy feudal taxation. Hassan Sabbah represented decentralization, regional autonomy, and fierce resistance to that economic extraction.
It's the classic battle between the rigid, massive empire and the agile, ideological rebels. It makes for a great story. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
Ideological fervor and a desire for economic justice are great in theory. They look great on paper. But you can't eat ideology.
Right.
When a massive Seljuk army surrounds the base of your mountain and cuts off all the roads for years on end, passion doesn't feed people. The sources mention these continuous, brutal economic and military blockades known as Sharbandan.
Yes.
So, mechanistically, how did this autonomous state actually survive? For nearly 170 years, they were repeatedly cut off from the outside world. How do they not just starve to death in a month?
That is the exact question that baffled the Celtics, and it is where the archaeological data from Dr. Chubak's team provides some of the most astonishing revelations of this entire history. To survive the Sharbandan, to survive decades of continuous siege warfare, the Ismailis of Alamut couldn't just be fierce warriors. They had to become world-class masters of engineering. Specifically, they had to master water.
Which is incredibly hard to do when you live on the top of a solid rock spire. There are no rivers flowing up to 2,163 meters. But they did it. The excavation found a staggering, highly complex water system. The records show they located a water source, the Koldar Spring, which was situated in the northern mountains, and they channeled it directly into the fortress.
And we are not talking about just digging a muddy ditch. They carved precise, graded canals straight through the living rock of the mountain. And for the critical transfer of this water across ravines and directly into the fortress structures, they used specialized manufactured clay pipes called tanbusha.
Let's talk about the physics of that for a second. A 10-centimeter clay pipe carrying water down a mountain. If you just let water run down an open channel on a sheer cliff, it evaporates, it gets contaminated, or it just washes away. But if you put it in a pipe, you have to deal with pressure.
Exactly. This is an early practical application of fluid dynamics. Think about putting your thumb over the end of a flowing garden hose. If the opening is wide, the water pressure drops, the flow is weak, and sediment can build up. If you restrict the opening, the pressure increases and the water shoots out faster. The Ismailis meticulously crafted these tanbusha pipes to be exactly 10 centimeters in diameter.
Wow, that's specific.
Yes. This specific size restricted the flow just enough to create high pressure, forcing the water to move rapidly through the system. This rapid flow prevented stagnant water, stopped sediment from building up and clogging the pipes, and ensured a steady, clean supply of drinking water directly into the heart of the citadel.
10-centimeter pressurized clay pipes carrying water across mountain ravines into a castle in the 11th century.
It's wild.
That is serious civic engineering.
Right.
But bringing water in is only half the battle during a siege. If I'm a Seljuk general, the very first thing I do is send a squad up the northern mountain to smash the Koldar Spring and cut the pipes. If the enemy cuts the source, you need massive reserves.
And their reserves were staggering in scale. The archaeologists uncovered dozens of enormous rock cisterns carved directly into the stone of the mountain. We are not talking about wooden barrels here. We are talking about massive underground chambers. One of them measures 8 meters long by 5 meters wide, carved entirely out of solid rock.
Wait, how do you keep a giant underground pool of water from just becoming a stagnant, disease-ridden mosquito pit over a 5-year siege?
By engineering the environment. By carving them deep into the rock, they kept the ambient temperature very low, which inhibits bacterial growth. The narrow openings minimize surface area to drastically reduce evaporation.
That makes sense.
And the engineering of these cuts is so fundamentally sound that even today, after centuries of utter neglect and structural damage, that specific 8 by 5 meter cistern still catches and holds seasonal rainwater perfectly.
That is unbelievable. A 1,000-year-old water tank still functioning based on its raw geometry. And our sources mentioned they didn't just rely on static tanks. They even designed self-refilling pits.
Yes, systems that would automatically replenish when emptied. While we don't have the complete schematics, it strongly suggests they were utilizing interconnected siphons or gravity-fed hidden channels deep within the rock to move water from larger reservoirs to daily use access points seamlessly.
This changes absolutely everything about how we have to understand the Ismailis of Alamut.
Yeah.
They weren't just rugged zealots hiding out in caves waiting to strike.
Not at all.
They were master engineers. They were hydrologists. They understood geology and fluid pressure well enough to build a sustainable, pressurized water grid on a mountaintop.
And they utilized this immense water supply for far more than just drinking. Hassan Sabbah established an incredibly advanced terraced irrigation system for the fields surrounding the lower levels of the fortress network.
Oh, wow.
They terraformed the mountain, they grew their own crops, managed their own soil, and achieved total agricultural self-sufficiency.
Which perfectly explains why the massive Seljuk Abbasid blockades kept failing year after year. The empire would march up, cut off the roads, set up their camps, and confidently wait for the rebels to starve. But inside that 2,000 square kilometer perimeter, the Ismailis were harvesting their own crops, grinding their own grain, and drinking cold water from rock-hewn cisterns.
Yeah, precisely.
They had built a completely closed-loop ecosystem. The Seljuks were trying to starve a community that literally did not need them to survive.
And if the Ismailis had any excess water from their spring system, they didn't just let it run off, they channeled the runoff to fill a 50-meter defensive moat around the most vulnerable lower access points of the fortress.
A 50-meter moat.
Yeah, just to make a frontal infantry assault even more suicidal for the Seljuk troops.
Every drop was weaponized or utilized. Survival was their baseline. But according to the excavation data, they didn't stop at mere survival. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn from pure military history into the history of science and high culture.
Yeah, it does.
Alamut wasn't just a grim utilitarian bunker. It was a major center of learning.
This is perhaps the most striking finding of Dr. Tubok's work. Let's look at the Malasara building. When the archaeological team finally excavated this structure, they didn't find the bleak, blood-stained walls or torture chambers you might expect in a fearsome assassin's lair.
Right.
They found exquisite sky blue tiles and intricate ashand decorations.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with architectural terms, what exactly is ashand?
Ashand is a specialized type of Persian mortar or stucco decoration. It's a very delicate, highly skilled art form used to create intricate geometric patterns, floral motifs, or calligraphy on walls.
Oh, beautiful.
The presence of this fine art of delicate plasterwork and beautiful sky blue ceramics inside a besieged mountain fortress is deeply significant. It shows us a society that actively values aesthetics, beauty, and high culture, not just warfare.
You don't spend time and resources firing delicate blue tiles if you're just a death cult.
Exactly. But more importantly than the art, the Malasara was a place of high science.
Yes. The sources explicitly mention the discovery of astronomical tools in the ruins. They found astrolabes. And just to break that down, an astrolabe is an incredibly complex, handheld mechanical computer used by ancient astronomers.
Exactly. It's essentially a two-dimensional physical map of the three-dimensional heavens. It consists of a stationary backplate, the mater, and a rotating top network called the rete, which maps the brightest stars. You use a sighting tube, an alidade, on the back to measure the